Good morning. Many years ago, a gentleman called Doug Ray and his friend Mike Carr used to take it in turns to take some of us young lads, us Davies boys, to take them with them when they preach to tell our story, to tell our testimony, how we came to faith in Jesus. I guess part of what our testimony is about. I guess I was about 15 or 16 at the time, and I think Mansfield and Gospel Hall was the first place I ever told my story, my testimony. But testimony is so key in sharing our faith, in evangelism. Telling our story in order to tell his story, to tell our story in such a way that causes people to listen to his story. John is full, as he says, of signs that are pointing to say that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. John chapter 2, it has the story of water to wine, Jesus' power of equality. In chapter 4, he heals an official's son. He shows his power over distance. In John chapter 5, he heals a lame man. His power over time. The man had been sick a long time. There's two signs in John chapter 6, feeding the 5,000, power over quantity. Jesus walks then on water. He has power of the laws of nature. And in John chapter 9, we have the story of the man born blind. And Jesus is seen to have power over misfortune. I want you to imagine with me, it's AD 60 and you pass an open courtyard on the outskirts of Jerusalem. You hear some laughter and you peep in and you see a small crowd of people seated on the floor around an old man who's seated on a stool. They're laughing along with this old man who sits there with his eyes twinkling. You sneak in at the back because you're drawn to this man who notices your covert approach, nods his head as he smiles at you. "Let me tell you my story," he says. And he starts to talk of how he was born blind and how he used to beg in the streets in order to feed himself and to help his parents and his brothers and sisters. "It was around 30 years ago," he says, "when I was around 25 years old when my life changed. I'd lived in despair with no hope or future. This fog of disillusionment and despair without any real prospect of my life changing or even getting married. Then I met him. Actually, I felt his touch really first. You see, I'd heard some voices talking about me in the distance, the usual stuff. Was it my fault? Was it this man's fault, the voices said, or was it his parents'? If I had an denarius for every time I heard that, I would be a rich man. Then I heard a different voice. They called him Jesus. Jesus said this, 'Neither this man sinned nor his parents that he was born blind, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him.' And Jesus continued, 'I am the light of the world.' Well, next I hear the sound of someone spitting, and a few moments later something was smeared on my eyes. It was warm and wet. And the voice that followed was calm, gentle, yet insistent, and spoke with such authority. 'Go and wash in the pool of Siloam.' Looking back, I don't know what made me do it, but I went and washed. At first there was just some grit in my eyes, and then there seems to be some growing light that changed from a dimness to something more bright. And as I washed again, it got brighter. And then blinking through my tears, I realized I could see. Imagine, I'd never seen a tree before, or a flower, or a person. I never seen my own mother and father. So deep was the joy that gripped me, and I danced the route home. The route that I before had felt my way. Now I could see it. Everything had changed. Can you imagine my parents' faces when they saw me race through the door? They struggled to believe at first, but I still see their tears as they stroked my face and wept for joy. But that was when the trouble started. You see, the man who had healed me, Jesus, he'd done it on the Sabbath. Crazy now when I think about it. What a fuss. I was taken before the religious leaders, the religious police, the Pharisees, and they kept on insisting that I wasn't blind before. It was just a trick. So they questioned my parents, and they agreed with my story. But they kept insisting that this man who had healed me was a sinner. So I said, whether this man was a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. You see, I told them of this man. This man had to be from God. How could he have done the things that he had done? No one ever heard of a man born blind seeing. That's when they threw me out. And I was sitting just like this right now, wondering at the sight of some birds flying by, when this man came up to me and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" There was something familiar about that voice, that tone, acceptance, gentleness, strength. Trembling, I said, "Who is he, sir? Tell me so I may believe in him." Then this man said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you." It was him. I knew it. It was Jesus. His name means Saviour, and he'd give me my sight. He'd become my rescuer. I knelt on the floor there and then before him and just simply said, "Lord, I believe." You know, as you watch that old man on the stool, he would point at you and say, "That was me 30 years ago, and he became the light of my world and helped me see." And then you watch him as he moves his hand from his eyes to his heart, and he whispers, "He became the light of the world and helped me see." And then he would look across the crowd at you and he would say, "That was my story. Now let me tell you his story." You see, folks, if you love Jesus, you have a come and see story. It's not just how you first encountered Jesus or I first met him, but how you encounter him in your life right now today as you tell your story so you can tell his story. And you can say, "That was my story. Now let me tell you his story." May God go with you today.